I'm Randi McGinn. My law firm is McGinn, Montoya, Love, and Curry. I practice law in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I've been practicing for 42 years. The nature of my practice, I would say, is we represent David or his spouse against Goliath, always. That's what we do. So often it's our little firm up against, 5 or 6 firms on the other side, and those are the kind of odds we like.
Why did you decide to become a lawyer? When did that happen? And what was that about?
Okay, first of all, I started off life as a journalist. The thing that attracted me to journalism was storytelling, of course. And I was working, stringing sports and writing for a newspaper and trying to sell spec articles to magazines and getting rejection letter after rejection letter and realizing that they weren't even reading it, and called my uncle and said, nobody's reading my stuff. And he said, well, why would they read your stuff? You're like some punk kid. I was like 20. You're a punk kid from New Mexico. Why should they even look at your stuff? He said, let me suggest to you that if you get an advanced degree, people will read your stuff. So I looked at, should I be a doctor? No, that's too hard, so looked at law school. So I went to law school for the completely morally bankrupt reason, Jerome, of maybe people would read my stuff. So I get to law school, and I find out that it was the place I was meant to be, because isn't trial work storytelling on steroids? I mean, it really is. You get to do all the things that you did as a journalist, collect all the facts from this giant steaming pile of facts. You reach in and you sort of pull out the heart of the story, and then it's almost like a kind of verbal alchemy, that if you can tell somebody's story truly and well, you can turn it into justice, can't you? And there is nothing better than that. And you don't just write the story, but you produce it, and you star in it, and you direct it. And so it's the best kind of storytelling of all.
There's a term that I made up that I use in a lot of my interviews, all of them, and that's the inception of purpose, right? It's that point in our lives when we realize that the path that we're on is the path that we're meant to be on. Right. When was that for you, right? And was it in law school?
It was in law school, yeah. It was like I said, I went there only so I could write stuff and I'd have a degree behind my name and somebody would read it. And it was in the trial practice classes. So same thing. Like you start taking trial practice and you say, oh, well, this is just like the place I was meant to be. The courtroom is both thrilling and terrifying at the same time, right? It is. People ask me what practicing law is like, and especially in the courtroom, it's not like classical music, it's like jazz. So there are sort of rules, but once you start trying a case, you start telling your story, they start telling an alternate story, and you've got to adapt in the moment. That's why I say it's like jazz. And you're improvising and responding to what's going on in the courtroom. And it's just the most exciting thing. And the terrifying part, of course, is it comes at the end of a case where you take your heart out of your chest and you stick it on the jury rail and tell the jury to make a decision, and they can stab your heart like this, or they can accept the story that you're telling them and do justice. And luckily, I've tried over 130 cases to verdict at this point, and I've only lost 6, which is that's pretty good. And so I haven't gotten stabbed. They haven't stabbed my heart that much, but it always feels the same way at the end of a case when the jury goes out.
And I'm sure you've had this in court where you're there and it's like you're watching yourself and they're watching you, and you're like, it's the live aspect of the moment.
Right.
And it is improvisation. It's totally jazz.
Right.
Because what do you know? You look up and there's a juror that looks chagrined for some reason. Like, are they following me? Have I lost them? What's going on? How have you really gotten used to that? How have you learned to use improvisation to keep your story unfolding the way that you want it to?
It's just doing it over and over again, So the more you do it, the better you get at it. And I think it takes you at least 10 trials before you can start focusing on things like even get outside of yourself to notice that the juror's upset, because the first 10 trials, you're just trying to figure out what happens next, right? You're saying like, oh, what's the rule? I know I'm supposed to object. What's the rule number I'm supposed to object about? So the first 10 trials, you're just like figuring out sort of the playing field and what the rules work like. And then after the first 10 trials, you can start doing things like working more on your presentation, on your voice, on your hand gestures, on things like noticing, get out of yourself and have to say, oh, that person looks really unhappy. I wonder what's going on, and can I do something to reach them? When I speak, can I begin speaking to them or directing witnesses to talk to them to help explain things? So it's just a matter of experience, you know, and it just takes a while to be able to do that. And now there's no place I'd rather be than the courtroom. I mean, it just is, it's just thrilling. And unfortunately, you know, the better you do, the less people let you go to court, right? So that's the frustrating part of it.
Oh, Randy's got this case.
That's it. Like,
all right, how much do we have?
That's the deal. And so I haven't gotten to try as many cases as I've done better and better, you know. And so that's unfortunate.
As personal injury lawyers, we're representing people, and I've already gotten from you that you have a passion for people. Right? How important has it been to you over the course of your 42 years to know your client, right, and to connect with them? How does that empower you as a trial lawyer to be better?
That's a very interesting question for me, because I thought after 42 years of representing people who come to me when the worst thing in their life has happened, when somebody's been killed, their kid's been killed, the breadwinner in the family's been made a quadriplegic, that's when they come to me. The worst thing in their life has happened. And after dealing for 39 years with all those kinds of cases, I thought that I knew what they were going through, the kind of profound grief they were suffering, until my husband, the love of my life for 30 years, died 3 years ago. And that was the first time, I mean, luckily for me, that I ever experienced profound grief in my life. And you can't really understand it unless you've experienced it. And things like terms that we use, like heartbroken or heartsick, you don't understand until it happens to you. There's this physical feeling that you can't get rid of, that you wake up in the morning and your heart is being crushed because your kid's just been killed, or there's this weight on you. And they're doing studies now that say this is why people who are married a long time, often the other person dies within 6 months or a year of when the other person dies, and because it's a physical thing. So I had no clue about that, Jerome, and I feel like in the last 3 years, I've become a much better trial lawyer, but also a much better person, because I understand profound grief all of a sudden. I mean, had you told me I was a crying person, I would have said, oh, no, I'm not a crying person. Turns out, wrong about that. Wrong about that. And so now when I say to my clients, I understand what you're going through, it's true. And it wasn't true before my husband died. And it's really interesting because I can talk about that, and now I've learned to ask jurors in the jury panel, how many of you have experienced profound grief? And I do it when I speak to audiences, and I'll tell you what, you can tell instantly who has and who hasn't because their eyes start to glisten. Like, so if I'm talking to a group of 500 people and I say, how many of you have experienced profound grief? Bam, they just like pop out in the thing. And the fact is, we are more connected by the trauma that happens in our life than we are about the happy things that happen in our life. And when I give a talk about this, when I talk about my husband dying and the experience of that, all kinds of people come up afterwards and want to talk to you about their own personal experiences. I mean, it is a thing that connects you to the rest of humanity in the way that other things do not.
Well, one word that I use a lot, and you know, Martin reminds me of this, is the word conduit, right? You're standing there between your client and 12 people, 6 people, right? Mm-hmm. And to a certain degree, if you understand what that is, right? And you're in court and you turn and you look at your client and you turn back to the jury, and that grief that your client has experienced is coming through you to that jury. and they have some experience of profound grief, then you're landing in a way, right? How have you developed an ability to really be that conduit? And I can imagine now that you've experienced that, turning to the jury and explaining that grief in your own words has changed.
It's not just that it's changed, but even before my husband died, the most important thing is to not have your client come to your office, but to go to their home. And whether they come to your office the first time to meet you, then you say, do you mind if I come to your house? Because there are things that you find in the home where they lived with their loved one, or even if someone's become a quadriplegic, that they can no longer get around to places that were in their home, that you can't see any other way. So for example, we had some clients whose 4-year-old daughter was killed by medical malpractice. We went to visit them. They called us about 6 months after she died. We went to visit their house 6 months after she died. We went to them, and they had 2 other kids, and they took us into the room, her room, the little girl's room, Katie, and they had touched nothing in the room for 6 months. Everything was the way they had left it when she went to the hospital. So there was the drawing on the easel that she'd been coloring. There was the crumpled up piece of paper that she'd crumpled up and rejected on the floor. Because their grief was so powerful that they couldn't change the room. And I suspect, even though we've had the case settled, that room may still be there, preserved in time, and that, like, you don't understand until you go there.
How important has it been to you over the course of this 42 years, right, to skill build, right, to get better, to learn, and how have you really expanded your toolbox, as they say?
The most fun thing I ever did to expand my toolbox was a improv course with Alan Arkin in Santa Fe. Oh my gosh. It was so much fun. It was like adult play. It was like the coolest thing to help you sort of get out of yourself and not take yourself so seriously. I mean, what I do a lot of teaching now and speaking, and what I tell particularly law students, people right out of law school, is that in order to really connect with jurors and people, you have to get the lawyer in your head that you sort of develop in law school. I have to be a lawyer now. I've got to act in a certain way and speak in a certain way. You've got to get that thing out of your head and be your authentic self. And that's the key. And to not be afraid to show your authentic self. I mean, like I say, it's the not be afraid to take your heart out and stick it on the jury rail, which is, again, terrifying to a lot of people. And to realize the other thing that I've realized over the years is that control is an illusion. That a lot of lawyers are A-type personalities, that I am one of them, and you think you can control everything, and then you do a voir dire and you realize no matter how much you've prepared, jurors say the craziest things, your respective jurors say things you've never anticipated and have beliefs that you've never anticipated. And so those are the things that I've learned. And then the thing that's taught me the most, though, Jerome, is teaching other people. Because to teach other people what you're doing, you have to figure out what you're doing, right? Like a lot of stuff that comes naturally to me, I say, well, why does that work, and what is it that I'm actually doing so I can teach somebody else about it? And that has probably done more to make me a better lawyer than anything, is teaching other people what I do.
Let's talk about some basic things that trial lawyers need to understand, right? If you're talking to a young lawyer, or maybe just an older lawyer that really just wants to be better, what are some core areas that attorneys should really have an understanding of in terms of being better? Where do you think trial lawyers really tend to lack or be behind? If you could give some wisdom to the others.
First of all, they have to learn the rules. I mean, that's not the fun stuff. That's not the improv stuff. But you got to know. That's right. That's not the adult play. But you have to learn the rules, and if that means like keeping your rules of evidence next to the John and then like reading them over and over again until you get them. I mean, that you have to know the rules, and you have to be able to, the people that know what rule to cite when they're objecting a rule of evidence to cite win, because if they can cite a rule number. So you have to learn your craft. You have to learn how to do direct. You have to learn how to do cross-examination. You have to learn the craft first. You can't just fly by the seat of your pants. You have to learn how to do it. And so you have to learn your craft first. And then you can start working on things like improv and using your voice and all that kind of stuff. But you have to learn it first. And people want to jump over to the fun stuff, but without doing the work, the hard work that you need to do to be able to walk into the courtroom and know what you're doing. Then you're always learning, right? I mean, like even now, now, I mean, I read everything I can on, advocacy and persuasion and books by neuroscientists and all kinds of other people to figure out how best to, and I take information from everywhere and every source. So even people I don't agree with. So when I see Donald Trump being so successful at communicating to people, I say, okay, what is it? Let me break down what the heck he's doing so I can learn lessons from him and figure out how to do a similar thing.
What do you love about what you do right now?
I've reached a place where I really feel comfortable in my own skin. Like I feel like I could walk into any situation in any place in the world, in a courtroom, anywhere, and be okay. And love I just love the courtroom. I love being in the courtroom. And unfortunately, in the pandemic, of course, we've been deprived of that because they closed all the courthouses. And I've done 2 trials since the courthouse was reopened, and 2 trials in the last 6 months. And it's just like so great to be back in the courtroom and to be in front of jurors again and letting them do their thing. And so that's my favorite thing. But I really like teaching and seeing young people light up and reflect. I'm reflecting a lot since my husband died on what lasts. And the only thing that lasts really is the people you leave behind to do the work that you love, right? So that's really important stuff to do.
And I talk a lot about legacy. Ultimately, when we teach other people, we're leaving little footprints of legacy.
Right.
How important is it for trial lawyers to come to things like Trial Lawyers University? Learning. We've talked so much about how important that is, but why is it important that plaintiffs' lawyers specifically come to events like TLU to learn and to get better?
Well, because it's lonely out there being a trial lawyer. I mean, it's lonely. It's lonely. There you are in the courtroom by yourself, like nobody ever sees you. The people that you see the most are the people who are against you. That's what you see defense lawyers more than you see plaintiffs lawyers. And particularly if you have your own shop or you have a small shop, and if you feel like it's you against the world out there all the time. And you come here and you get people to help you do what you do better, and you get a group of people that are an army with you. And my experience with Trial Lawyers University is that you make connections so that when some horrible problem comes up, you have people you can call or text these days. You don't call, you text them and say, oh my God, this horrible thing, I'm in the middle of a trial, this horrible thing has happened. And you get answers back from all these people that you've met telling you what to do. And so you don't feel so alone anymore, right? You've got this army of folks that will help you out. It's also fun to try cases with other people. It's just really, it's great. You can go back at night and commiserate about what jerks the other side were and things like that, which you can't do. I mean, luckily I have a firm that's about 9 lawyers, so we do some of that here, but to make connections like you make here at TLU is just really fabulous. And you don't feel alone anymore after you leave one of these conferences.
Well, what do you see the next 10, 15, 20 years like for you? You're teaching, you're practicing, you're dealing with still very complex, catastrophic cases, and it sounds like you're doing a lot.
Yeah.
Right? What's down the road for you?
I would say more of the same, because it's such a great job. I mean, there's no better job than being a trial lawyer. And so more of that, more teaching, and more writing. So I've written a book that's been out there now for a couple of years, and so I think I'll probably write some more. and go back to my journalism roots, and maybe somebody will actually read what I wrote this time. You know,
I
we'll see.
was just getting ready to
That's
say,
it.
I'm sure people will be reading this time. All right.